Everybody, and welcome back. We are going to learn about carbohydrates today. Um, we learned the other day about organic compounds. We learned about monomers and polymers. We learned about what makes an organic compound organic, that it has to have carbon and hydrogen. And we also learned about the reactions, synthesis and hydrolysis. And we're going to look at an example of that today. We're going to look at a carbohydrate. Now, remember, there were four types of organic molecules: carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And today we are going to learn about the first group, which is carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are hydrocarbons. That should make sense because they have C and H, and they also have O. Those are the three elements that you will find in a carbohydrate. Carbohydrates have a special formula or a special ratio that I'm circling down here. So what you'll see there is it's written CnH2nOn. What that means is that for any carbohydrate, the amount of carbon is going to equal the amount of oxygen. So if there's 3 carbons, you can expect 3 oxygens. What that also means is that the amount of carbon is equal to 2 times the amount of hydrogen. So you will have twice as much hydrogen. So for example, if we have a carbohydrate with 3 carbons, the formula would be C3H6O3. So what would it be if we had a carbohydrate made of 4 carbons? Well, in that case, we could expect it to be C4H8O4. Now, carbohydrates are short-term energy, which means it's energy that we store for a short time, but it usually gets used up pretty fast as long as we're using lots of energy. Where might we store carbs? We actually store them in muscle cells and in the liver. All right. So a few other things we need to know about carbs. The monomers of a carb is called a monosaccharide. So a monosaccharide, mono means one, saccharide means sugar. So a monosaccharide is a monomer. And they typically will have these ring structures. So if you see this thing here labeled fructose, notice that it looks like a pentagon. And then there's glucose. Glucose looks like a hexagon. Each of those is a monomer. The hexagon shape is a monomer. The pentagon shape is a monomer. Fructose is one example of a monosaccharide, a monomer. And glucose is another example of a monosaccharide, a monomer for a carbohydrate. There are also things called disaccharides. Disaccharides are when you take 2 monosaccharides and join them together. What sort of a reaction is going to join 2 monomers together? Think about it from the other day. So it's a synthesis reaction. A synthesis reaction will join 2 monomers and create a disaccharide. So a disaccharide means 2. So notice here, we have combined glucose and fructose with a bond, and now they are connected. All right, there are 2 other disaccharides, lactose and sucrose. So sucrose we see there. There is also lactose. All right, here are some other examples of disaccharides. So we already talked about sucrose. Lactose is one found in milk. We have table sugar, milk sugar, and then there's another one called maltose, and maltose is malt sugar. So just another type of disaccharide that we would recognize as a sugar. All right. So there's monosaccharides, there's disaccharides, and there's polysaccharides. A polysaccharide is a chain that's much longer than 2. Polysaccharides are a long chain of monosaccharides. And we have some examples that you need to know. The first one is starch. Starch is found in plants. Plants make starch, and it is stored energy. There's also something called the glycogen. Glycogen is stored energy. It's a long chain, and it's found in humans. It's made in animals. Animals make glycogen. Plants make starch. And then we have cellulose. So cellulose, again, is found in a plant, but cellulose is not for energy. Cellulose is for structure. So cellulose gives plants their structure. So we have starch, glycogen, and cellulose. Starch and cellulose are found in plants. Glycogen is found in animals. All right. Cellulose is also what makes the cell walls for plants, and we're going to talk about that more in the next chapter. Okay, so we got two questions here that you should answer. First question, the plant produces which polymer that's used for structure, not energy? And the second question, the plant produces which polymer which is used for energy? Take a moment and answer those questions. All right, so the plant produces two things. One of them is cellulose and the other one is starch. Remember, starch is for energy and cellulose is for structure. All right, so there's the answer to that. We have another question. Name a monosaccharide, and then what joins disaccharides? Okay, so a monosaccharide, you could have said glucose, you could have said fructose. Disaccharides are joined by a dehydration synthesis reaction is the answer to that one. Okay, so let's take a look at a closer look at some of these polymers. So we're going to start with starch. Starch is found in foods that nutritionally we would consider starchy: bread, wheat, potatoes, corn. All of those vegetables and plants have a lot of starch. That is a long glucose chain. You see the glucose chain at the bottom. So dehydration synthesis makes that. Now, something to note and also something to write down is that starch is something that humans can digest. We can eat starch and use it for energy. Plants use it for energy, but we can also eat it then and use it for energy. This is why we eat bread, potatoes, rice, corn, because of those long starch molecules. We can use the energy that's found in those bonds. So starch made by plants, used by humans, they can both use it for energy. Glycogen is a polysaccharide that animals make. So animals, like humans, are going to store glycogen in their liver and muscle cells. Glycogen is another long chain. You can see it down here in the lower left. It's long chains of glucoses. The difference is it's branched. So notice how it's not one straight line, but it has all of those branches. That actually makes it faster to break down. We can break down glycogen faster than starch. So it's useful in an emergency. So for example, if you were starving and you needed energy right away, your body might start breaking down some glycogen pretty quickly. So stored in the liver and muscle cells, broken down very fast because of its branched shape. You might even want to write that down, branched shape. And then we have our third polysaccharide, which is cellulose. Cellulose is made by a plant, but it is for structure and not energy. Okay, so we know cellulose by another name nutritionally. We call it fiber. Fiber and cellulose are not digestible. Our body doesn't actually break them down for energy, but we do need them because they help push waste through our digestive system. So it's actually very helpful for us to eat lots of fiber, but it's not because of energy. So cellulose looks a lot like starch. If you notice the picture here, it looks very similar to starch, but it's actually a little bit different. You don't need to worry about the difference, but it is a little bit different, and our body is not capable of breaking it down. So, starch and glycogen have an important relationship in the human body. And we want to go over that as our very last thing with carbs. The first thing you need to know is that humans eat starch for food, right? We eat wheat, we eat corn, we eat potatoes. So basically, what happens is starch is hydrolyzed. What do we think that word means? It looks like kind of like hydrolysis, so it means to break down. So starch is broken down in our digestive system. This is our digestive system down here in the lower left. And our digestive system is going to break the polymer into monomers. So remember, starch was a long chain of glucoses, and our stomach and our intestines are going to break that chain up into individual pieces. So we are breaking starch down. Okay, then what happens is those pieces are sent through the blood to our liver. And our liver, the organ that I'm circling there, is going to rebuild those monomers, the glucose monomers, into glycogen. Glycogen has a slightly different shape than starch. So we break starch down and we build it into something new. Our body then will be able to store glycogen and we can use it in an emergency. So this is a very important relationship in our body. This is basically how we break down the food we eat and we rebuild it into something useful. So here is everything put together. Here is the starch that we ate. Our digestive system is breaking it down into monomers. Those monomers are being sent into our blood, and our blood takes the monomers to our liver, and the liver will build those monomers into the highly branched polysaccharide called glycogen. Glycogen is how animals like humans store glucose. And then we can use that glycogen in an emergency if we need to. All right, that is it for our lecture on carbohydrates. If you have any questions, please let me know.